Okay, so that's all stuck together in a full frame now, and I put a little bit of bracing in here so that I could sand off the front side like that without it getting too weak. And this will now slide in from the back. It's a pretty close fit though. It's so close in fact that, see that scraping there, that's just from the fact that these holes around here have a little bit of a lip on them. Okay, I have this perfect shape here, but it's only being held by a thin seam of hot glue, and it was getting inconvenient to have these reinforcing brackets in there, so I've taken them out and I'm going to replace them with a little bit of fiberglass tape just on the inside here to make it nice and strong and lock in this position. But I'm going to put it in the bike frame while I let the epoxy cure to make sure I don't get it in a funny shape when it cures. I'm also going to put tape all the way along the bottom of this section here because the other three sections are butted up right against the bars of the frame of the bike, so they don't need a whole lot of reinforcement. But this one's kind of sitting open at the bottom. There's no reinforcement from the bike frame underneath it. So after that epoxy cured on the inside, I was able to sand these outside corners smooth because I'll probably put some more glass around the whole outside of it as well. And right now I'm just checking, I'm temporarily holding the sides into place because I wanted to check if I could get this ESC in and out of this position by just tipping it sideways and bringing it back this way, which I can, fortunately. I have to go like a little bit of a fiddle, but eventually it works. So now I can get the ESC all the way back here without taking the sides off. And what that means is that this part here around the ESC can stay in there permanently. So this doesn't need to be part of the opening and closing lid. The reason I like that is it will make things a bit stronger because I can sort of reinforce it here across there. And the other reason is that I don't really want to have a hinge right at the top of the box like that because I'm going to try and make this at least reasonably waterproof for rain falling from the top. Maybe not other splashes around, but definitely rain falling from above. Well, that's going to be, rain will be falling in that direction. So if I can make it so that the hinge is not here, but instead this piece comes down a bit lower and it has an overhang, this bottom piece where the battery goes can just sort of slot in under the overhang, hopefully. So I haven't really figured out how I'm going to do that, but I will show you what I end up with when I end up with it. And the next thing to figure out is how far this permanent section, so this is all going to be closed off permanently here, how far that can come down before it interferes with getting the battery in and out, while also considering that I want to brace the bottom corner here too. And it looks like I can actually bring this bracing all the way down to here before I have trouble getting the battery in. So you just got to do it slowly, but it's still pretty easy. Actually, I realized that there's no reason that I need to be using a straight line at all, so I think I'll go with something like this, which solves all my problems quite nicely and looks a bit more stylish as well. Okay, this should work nicely. Even though we've covered up quite a bit of this area, it turns out we can still put it in either that way or that way, as I will demonstrate. So coming in from this side works. Oops, not supposed to bump that. Alright, that's not too hard. But I can also tip it that way, like that, oops, like that, and get it out like that too. So, one way or another, I think it won't be too hard to get in and out. This is looking at the inside of the box, and when this panel is placed on, we need a way to stop it from falling into the box. And at the bottom, on these edges here, it's going to be stopped by the edge of the box itself. But in the middle section here, on this edge, there's nothing to stop it falling in. So what I'm going to do is put a piece of this thin 1mm by 10mm carbon strip, and I'm just going to glue it so that it protrudes a little bit into where the lid comes on like that. And I'll let it go all the way out here so it'll be good reinforcement for this bit, which is quite thin there. But because it's very thin, it's not going to be intruding into the space inside the box very much. And we also can't make it protrude that way too much, so I didn't want to make it like that, sticking out that much, because we've just gone to all this trouble to clear that space so we can put the battery in, so we don't want to clutter it up again. So that's glued on there now, and it stops this piece from falling through at the top. Next thing I want to do is make it a little bit easier to line this up like that, because it's kind of it's not a pure circular arc, but it's close enough that it doesn't always just sort of fall into place. Oh, that was pretty good. But to make it fall into place a little bit easier without having to like look at it and twiddle with it, I'm going to cut this in half. It's just a 4mm carbon rod, and I'm going to stick a little bit of that so that it pokes up into the top piece here and then there as well. The two screws that mount the ESC at the front will go in here like that through there, but after this piece goes on, and this is going to be permanent this time, so when that's there, those are going to be very difficult to get at. So one way to do it would be to make a captive nut, or somehow just have the nut that sticks on there, maybe like welding it on or something, but I don't want to weld this. It looks like it would be weldable, but I'll probably make a huge mess of it if I tried that. And when the nut is captive, it also prevents you from sliding it side to side. See, these holes are a little bit elongated, so they're quite useful for adjusting the sideways position. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to poke this little rod through there and make a mark here and drill a hole so that I can put the screw in from that side. I mean, access it with a screwdriver from that side, and then after that's done, probably just cover the hole with packing tape or something, I guess. Okay, I have that access hole done there now, and I've put glued in these wooden mounts for the ESC, and they are to raise it away from the wood so that there's a bit more airflow underneath the ESC for cooling, and also to make it so that this hole here is a little bit more central between the sides. And the reason for that is because I wanted to put some reinforcing along the insides of the box there in the form of these little triangular I don't know, strips or whatever you want to call them. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any small enough at the hardware store. They only had these ones, which are a little bit too big, so I had to sand them down quite a lot, like about that much. And I thought that was going to take forever, but it turns out that when you replace the belt on your belt sander, things actually go quite quickly, so that wasn't too much trouble at all. Yeah, and I wanted to have these 10mm, like 10mm on each side, and that is to reinforce the edges of the box, of course, when it's all glued together, but also because I want to be able to sand around the edges, not here, but along this top edge especially, and I wouldn't be able to do that much unless there was some extra wood behind the corner like that. And the reason I want to sand it around is so that when the cloth goes on, it's not going to sort of jut and go square like that. I want it to drape a little bit more smoothly around the edge. And these little pegs here are done now too. They didn't really go quite as nicely as I would have liked, but they do perform the job all right. So sort of make sure you get it in exactly the right spot without having to twiddle too much. For mounting the ESC, I hadn't given too much thought to whether the bolts were going to come in from the top or the bottom, but either way I realized I can't have any protrusions along the top here because this edge needs to be perfectly flat to slide in underneath the frame of the bike, or at least on one side it needs to be perfectly flat. So what I've decided to do is put screws in from this side, and now that I have a little bit more thickness here with this extra 10mm of the little mounting pad, I can drill a fairly deep hole in this side and put a lock nut in there, and this is all perfectly flat like that still, and I can fill this with epoxy so that the lock nut becomes a captured nut from this side, and then the screws will all go in from the bottom, and that'll be quite nice, I think. And the other advantage of doing it this way is that there's not going to be any holes in the top for water to get into, because this is going to be perfectly sealed, whereas if I had the screw going in from the top, there'd have to be a hole, right? Alright, so that's how that looks in the bike as it stands at the moment. It's quite a bit lighter than the original. It's about 600 and something grams there, although it's not finished, so I'm hoping to keep it under a kilo. The original was 1.4 something kilos, but this one, it's nice that it's slimmer as well, so it's about maybe 1 centimetre slimmer, but the area, the internal area, is actually slightly larger than the original. So the bike's all back together mostly, and it's a little bit dark now, but I want to do some testing tomorrow with the amp clamp, make sure it doesn't go over 40 amps, at least not by much. So I'm just charging up the battery here. I was planning in the long run to make it, or have it so that the battery could stay in the bike and be charged, which should be no problem, but for the time being I want to keep an eye on what the cells are doing. And it's not too difficult to get this out of the bike, actually. It's probably easier or quicker than my other system with the 4 big lipos. They took longer to get in and out of the bike than these do. Anyway, so I'm just keeping an eye on these here. They've been charging for about an hour or so, and we've got 32.85 there and 32.84 there, so they're keeping sync quite nicely, these 8 cells and these 8 cells, and I can balance within this set of 8 and within this set of 8, just in this, you know, not across the whole 16, unfortunately. That's what that would do. But I don't really want to do that too much. I'm just using this to keep an eye on it. I think in the future I might actually buy a LiPo charger that can handle 8 cells, and every once in a while I could just do a storage charge so that these would all be targeted to a specific voltage, like 3.8 volts for storage or whatever, and then leave it at that as for the balancing. And since I've set this to go up to 4.12 volts or whatever it was, it's not going to exceed, I'm pretty sure it's not going to overcharge anything. And as for the undercharging, I'll just have to keep an eye on it on the little dashboard thing, and yeah, hopefully that'll be alright for a while. Well, good news. It seems that this ESC does indeed limit the current to 40 amps, so I'm really happy about that, because that was the major unknown in this whole picture, and it could have really thrown a spanner in the works if it didn't limit the current like that. So yeah, I was really kicking myself for not measuring this with the old battery, like before I started to dismantle everything to do this like refresh. I should have just done this measurement, but at the time I didn't have an amp clamp like this, and it would have been a little bit awkward to do. So what I did today was just drive around on the farm about 15-20 minutes or so far, just checking if everything stays at reasonable temperatures and stuff. And it was a bit tricky to see this stuck on here with the precision sellotape while I'm riding on slippery gravel roads that twist and turn and stuff, but I was able to see well enough to see that the highest value was only about 39 amps. 39.3 I think was the maximum value I saw, and that had to be on a hill, going up a hill, because on level ground it would only go up to about 29 to 30 amps. In fact, for a while I thought it was limiting at 30 amps because I'd only ever see 29 amps was like the highest value I'd ever see, even at full throttle, but that was on level ground. So as soon as you get to a hill, or if you're accelerating right at the beginning of an acceleration, you could see over 30 amps as well. But it's good to know that full throttle on level ground is only going to be about 30. This is with the chain going into the middle cog on the cassette, so if you change that, you might be able to get it to hold a higher current on level ground at full throttle or something like that. But for now, that's really good news. And some more good news is the fact that after that 20 minutes at what will be the full load that these cells will have to endure, they haven't really diverged much either within themselves on one half of the pack like this. So there's 37 millivolts there. Overall 31.75 there and 31.75 there. It's quite a good match, isn't it? Over here, slightly more divergence at 54, but they started at slightly more when I did the test. So overall, that load hasn't really changed things too much, which is a really good sign. It's only 20 minutes, so to do a real test of how far these cells are going to diverge, I think we'd need to discharge them way more than the level that they're at the moment. But so far, so good. Just did another 20-minute ride. We've got 30.61 and 46 millivolts and 30.62 and 31 millivolts. So it's actually getting better, aren't they? That's good. Okay, I just did another 40 minutes riding. That's about 14 kilometers of fairly hilly area. It's about the only area that I have around here is hilly. And the cells are down to about 3.53 or so. And the divergence between them is actually getting smaller for both halves of the pack. So we've got 40 millivolts here, 28.27 volts there, and 28.29 or 3 volts there, and only 18 millivolts or so diversion between them here. So I'm pretty happy with this. It looks like all the cells are healthy, no strange issues with the connections here seem to be balanced out all right to let all of the cells discharge equally, which is great. And yeah, it's saying 9% there. I think I'll take it a little bit more, but I'm starting to feel a distinct lack of power compared to when it was fully charged. It still pulls me up that hill next to the airstrip here, which is the biggest hill around, I think. It pulls me up that pretty well still, but just a little bit on the slow side now, and I find myself holding the throttle at full throttle more than I did before. So it's definitely more fun in the first half of the pack. And I think the issue is that because the ESC is limiting the current, as the voltage of the pack goes down, you can't just increase the current to account for the lower voltage to get the same power output. So your overall power output's just going to be limited by the battery voltage, which is kind of a bummer, but it keeps everything safe and nothing's going to overheat, or the cells are going to be safe and everything, so that's fine. This is the little dashboard thingy that I got, and for 20 bucks I wasn't expecting too much, but it turned out to be pretty good, so I could actually recommend this to others. The only thing that's really kind of annoying is that the cable between the hall sensor and the dashboard thing is ridiculously short. It's like 10 centimeters or something. So if you want this to be inside your battery box and this to be on your handlebars, you're going to have to make an extension for that. About 1.5 kilowatts. So this is about 10 amps, 10 or 11 amps. No. .62 volts. Can you see that? So we're getting up this hill. This is not full throttle. Let's try full throttle. That was 40 amps a little bit. Or 39.9 as it said. Seems like there's a lot of rolling friction on this gravel. This is actually slightly downhill, but it won't roll. Needs some power. Look at this. It's kind of like rock faces and stuff everywhere. Huh. Anyway, so Voltage is reading 62.3. We started at 66, so we're down 3.7 volts. It says I've used 223 watt hours, and we have 13.9 amp hours remaining. This is a little bit subjective. I set it to 17.4. The cells are supposed to be 3000 milliamp hours each, so 6 of them in parallel would be 18 amp hours, but just to bump that down a little bit, I made it 17.4. So we're 4.5 amp hours down, I think that is, yeah, but nowhere near zero yet. And this is, I think, around about 9 kilometers from home. About 20 amps to climb here. $25. $30. This is level ground. Fairly slow speed. 7 amps. It's fairly comfortable though. Doesn't feel like I'm riding slow, it just sort of feels like about as fast as I'd be riding if I was pedaling fairly quickly. Yeah, 7. That's at 58, about 58, 59 volts though, so it'd be a little bit less if it was at full charge, of course. Now we have a hill, 20 amps. Actually, I want to give it a little bit easier gear here. There we go. So this is going to be 20. And it feels quite, I was going to say it feels really slow, but it's not bad. 18. Yeah, about 20. So it's 1 kilowatt. And if I do some full throttle, 2.2 kilowatts, 40 amps, and down to 55 volts. But I don't really want to do that too much because I think it's going to make the motor hot. I think the battery will handle it fine, and the ESC is barely getting warm, but the motor does get quite hot. Actually, not right now, so let's do a bit more of that. 41. Oh yeah. That's fun. That is fun. Okay, I just got home about 10 minutes ago, so these cells have had a little chance to bounce back, and I covered 27 kilometers of very hilly ground, and starting from 66.1 volts, and it's gone down to 58.3, and the highest current was of course 40 amps, and the lowest that I saw the voltage sag to was 55 volts, or 54.9, and that was right at the end when I was full throttling it up the hill on the way, you know, just before getting home. So I'm quite happy with that, because if you consider that, say, 3 volts per cell would be 48 volts, there's still quite a long way to go. And I'm just sort of thinking about it as I'm talking, and I reckon we could get to 40 kilometers range easy, maybe even 45. Depends how far you want to push it. I wouldn't want to go too much more than 3 volts per cell, so say 48 volts on here. Yeah, but my other pack that I had before, the LiPo pack, I tested that on flat ground, and on flat ground I could only get 25 kilometers from that, and that was really pushing it because the battery alarm was screaming when I got home. Yeah, so I'm quite happy with this. It seems like it was worth the effort to build that pack. Okay, we're at the bottom of the airstrip, sitting on 55.1 volts, and we have to climb up there, like that height, plus about another 15, maybe even 20 meters. And I've put it in a low gear, and let's see. I'm pretty sure it'll do it. I'm just wondering what voltage we're going to be left with by the time we get to the top. And I want to try and figure out the best strategy, because I'm thinking just crawling like this might be best, because that'll keep the current lower, I think. But it'll take longer, right? So the other way to do it would be to try and keep up some speed so that your momentum is higher all the way up. Not sure if that really helps, but when I'm pedaling, it feels like keeping momentum helps. So anyway, we're sitting on about 20 amps to do this. 52 volts. Seems to be okay. Let's try full throttle. 40 amps. 49 volts. Hold on. Okay, 49.3. 49.1. 49.0. Alright, so we still haven't reached 3 volts per cell yet. Alright, straight back up to 53 volts there. Yeah, so it's just dipping below 49 volts when I was going full throttle. So I'd say some of the cells would have gone below 3 volts there. Yeah, so it's not as peppy as it was at full charge, that's for sure. But it's not really leaving me without the confidence that I can get up the hill, which is the main thing, I suppose. And here we are, top of the hill, no problem. 53.7, 53.8, 53.9. 54, yeah. Okay, it is again about 10 minutes after I got back, and I have now done 42 kilometers on this pack, and we've gone from 17.5 amp hours to 2.5, so it's about 15 amp hours, and as it says there, 879 watt hours, and we're sitting on 54.7 volts. So you may be thinking, well, we can go down to 48 volts then, can't we? But I don't know, it's completely different to ride now than it was when it was at full charge. It's just feeling like it doesn't have anywhere near as much get up and go. So if you wanted to push it right down to as far as the battery could go, I'd probably want to be on flat ground just so that you could really nurse it along. But where I am here with all the hills and everything, I don't think I'd really want to go much lower than this. And right now I'm thinking I should probably take the battery out and check what the individual cell voltages are. Okay, so I did use the bike a couple more times, just close to home. I didn't want anything to go wrong, so I just checked my mail. That's about 500 meters uphill mostly. So we're at 43 kilometers total now, and it just really doesn't want to play anymore. It's a completely different experience. So voltages are about 3.36, I guess, on average there. And I'm going to call this like the end of the charge. It sunk down to about 44 volts under load, but that's still 2.75 volts per cell, so I don't think I damaged anything. Okay, so here's the current state of the box with the carbon on the outside. It turned out pretty good, about as good as I could have hoped for. It actually looks a lot better on camera somehow, so what you're seeing there in the video, it might not quite look that good if you were here in person looking at it. Not really sure why. I think maybe your eye is a little bit better at detecting the lack of smoothness when you're looking at it in real life. But anyway, these nostril things worked out fairly well, like that. They're nice and strong. The overlap from the fabric there is showing through quite a bit, like where the thickness of the fabric changes there. Yeah, hopefully you can see what I mean with that. But that's not a big deal. Basically the only problem I have at the moment is that where I sanded around these corners like that, we're getting some really, really nasty sharp bits of carbon showing through, and it's not really the kind of thing that I can ignore, because I'll probably forget about it and I'll cut myself at some point. So I could either just put a little bit of packing tape over the top, or I could maybe try and put a bit more resin in there, or maybe even a bit more clear coat, but I think resin might be a bit better way to go. And maybe I could just spread a little bit of resin along here and then put this on like that, Igor Nagota style, and maybe try and keep it smoothed over like that. I don't want to put too much on there because I don't want to have to sand it back off again. So that's one thing I have to deal with. And then the other thing that needs to be done is how is this going to hold on like that. And it sits in there quite nicely, and it's held on at the top pretty well. So it's not going to fall off like that, and it can't really go sideways or anything, and even at the bottom here it doesn't lift out. But what it can do is fall down, directly downwards like this, against gravity fairly easily. So all I really need to do is have some sort of a stopper from here holding, like sticking up a bit like that. So I'm thinking I might put some packing tape on here and here, and slap a bit of carbon fiber on here to sort of mold around there, and then I'll just screw or have some sort of a captive nut in there to hold it on. It's not really the greatest idea. I was hoping to make it so that you could quickly undo by hand and take it off, just in case something went wrong. I saw a video on YouTube somewhere where a guy was riding along and his battery started smoking and he had to quickly pull it out and throw it away. But he was doing something a little bit silly. I can't remember exactly what, but the batteries that I have, I don't think we're going to have that problem. So I've decided that it doesn't matter if you need a screwdriver to get it off, and it takes like a while, so hopefully we won't be having any emergencies where I do end up needing to get this open very quickly. Okay, so here's the box finally back on the bike again, and it looks pretty good, I think. The problem that I was having with these edges here is completely fixed now. There's no rough edges at all. Feels really nice. Around on this side, the door fits pretty good. Oh, sorry, that was the door side, wasn't it? Well, that's a good sign that the door blends in, because I didn't notice that I was looking at it. At least through the camera lens, it's a little bit harder to tell, of course. When I look at it normally like this, yeah, okay, I can see the door there, and the clasp, or whatever you want to call that, doesn't stick out too much. Seems to be a little bit white on the top there for some reason. Not sure why. Maybe if I put a little bit of clear coat on there, it might get a little bit more black coloured. But anyway, it doesn't stick out too much. And this side, doesn't look quite so good because, oh yeah, this is the side that was having problems with the little sharp cutty bits. That's perfectly fine now. But you can maybe see it's a little bit cloudy around this edge. And that's because there was an extra bit of resin that got slapped on there. And unfortunately, when you sand it, it looks a bit different to the rest of it, which has that nice sort of hologrammy effect over most of it. Hopefully you can see that it looks all hologrammy there. Looks pretty good. The nostrils look great. From the top, when you're riding it, it looks beautiful, because this is the nicest, smoothest edge where the fabric was wrapped over the top like that. So that looks really good. Yeah, anyway, that's how we are at the moment. Now I've got to put the ESC and stuff back inside and get it running again. Okay, that's everything put back together, and it all seems to be working fine again. So I better finish up the video here, and I think this project is pretty much finished now too. I had intended to make a kind of a mount for this, but it's working perfectly fine like that. So I'm just going to leave it. And also, eventually one day I had also intended to fix the mount for this motor so that it doesn't flex quite as much, but to be honest, it's working perfectly well the way it is, so I'll probably be too lazy to do anything about that. And I said I was going to sell this bike, so I was doing it up to sell it, but I've decided now I'm just going to keep it at least until this battery is like depleted, and then I'll maybe think about selling it then. And a couple of reasons for that. One is that the battery is not quite as foolproof as I had intended, so I was going to put that balancing thing on and stuff, and I've ended up not doing that. Amazingly, the more I use this battery, the better balanced the cells become. Every time they get closer and closer overall. So that's really nice. Yeah, the other reason I'm not selling it is because I'm actually using it quite a lot now. With the new battery, not being so fussy about, being returned to storage charge and stuff like the lipos were. And also now that I have a charger, a dedicated charger that I can just plug it in and charge it without having to use my RC lipo balancing charger and stuff. Yeah, I've been using it quite often, so I think I'm just going to keep it. Anyway, yeah, that's the end. Thanks for watching. Bye.